Dawn crept over the wide plains with a patience that felt ancient, as if the sun itself hesitated to disturb the stillness settling over the land. Its first rays glided across the weathered boards of an old barn, sliding over the warm grain of the timber and stirring the drifting dust like tiny spirits waking from slumber. Beneath a blanket of brittle hay, a young Apache woman lay hidden, her breath shallow and fragile, each inhale a trembling reminder of how far she had pushed her body. She had walked longer than exhaustion should have allowed, her strength hollowed out by the weight of the past 3 nights. At only 22, she carried years of truth that had cost her more than silence ever would. Cast out not for wrongdoing but for refusing to swallow injustice, she had spoken against an elder who betrayed her family, and the tribe answered with cold indifference. No one stepped forward, no one defended her. They simply turned their backs and sent her into the darkness with a torn blanket and the ache of words left unheard. As she wandered across the plains, isolation settled deep into her bones. When she found the barn, it felt less like luck and more like a mercy she believed she no longer deserved, a place where shadows softened and hay offered shelter from a world that had abandoned her. She crawled into the barn's warmth and allowed the darkness to hold her carefully, expecting only a brief, uneasy rest before hunger or danger pulled her out again. What she did not expect were footsteps. At first light, a cowboy entered, tall, steady, built from quiet burdens he rarely spoke of. He was 29, his presence shaped by losses that lived in silence rather than scars. He stepped inside, searching for a missing calf, unaware that someone's shattered world lay hidden in his hay. When he noticed her, he froze, not from fear but from an immediate recognition of suffering. Her eyes rose to meet his, fierce, despite her trembling frame. She braced for anger, for accusations, for the roughness she had grown accustomed to when men dealt with frightened strangers. Instead, he knelt with careful deliberation, as if approaching a wild creature who had every reason not to trust. His voice came soft, almost hesitant, promising no threat. "Pack your things. You're coming home with me." The words hit harder than cruelty ever had. She whispered that she owned nothing to gather. He seemed unsurprised, offering his hand but not forcing her to take it. When she finally stood, her legs unsteady, he kept a respectful distance as he guided her toward the soft morning light. She followed a few paces behind him, not from suspicion, but from the instinct of someone who had survived too much to walk beside anyone just yet. The sky stretched pale and endless above them as they crossed the short distance to his house, and for the first time in days, she felt the faintest easing of the loneliness that had lived inside her like winter frost. His home sat quiet, framed by a porch that held the stillness of years lived alone. He pushed the door open and stepped aside, offering space rather than pressure. She hesitated at the threshold, fingers brushing the wooden frame as though testing whether the moment was real. Inside, the air carried the scent of cedar and yesterday's bread, and a small lamp cast a warm, amber glow across the room. He guided her to a chair near the hearth, each movement measured and gentle, as though he feared any abruptness might send her fleeing back into the storm of her memories. He poured warm water into a tin cup and placed simple food before her: cornbread, beans, a strip of dried meat. Hunger twisted through her sharply, but she tried to hide it. "Eat if you want," he murmured, turning his back so she wouldn't feel watched. She began slowly, then with growing need, warmth spreading through her limbs like hope learning to breathe again. When she looked at him, standing near the window with loneliness draped over him like an old coat, she found no judgment, only quiet empathy. "Why help me?" she asked. His reply was simple: "No one deserves to be cold and alone." The honesty unsettled her, loosening something she thought had died long ago. He showed her to the small guest room, a quiet space warmed by a soft quilt and a bed that looked almost too gentle for someone who had slept more nights on the ground than under a roof. He lit the hallway lamp, explaining in a low voice that the light would help her if she woke disoriented during the night. She lay down hesitantly, as though afraid the comfort might vanish if she moved too quickly. Sleep tugged at her with unexpected kindness, and for the first time in years, she surrendered to it without flinching at every creak or shadow. Outside, night whispered promises she didn't quite dare believe. Inside the hallway, he paused and listened to her breathing, steady now, no longer sharp with fear. It surprised him how her presence didn't feel like an intrusion, but like the quiet filling of a long, empty space in his life. When morning returned, she woke slowly, wrapped in a peace she barely recognized. Her limbs still ached from the days of wandering, but her mind felt less frayed, less bruised. She wasn't certain she belonged here. Belonging had always been ripped from her, but she sensed something had shifted the moment he spoke those impossible words in the barn. A beginning she hadn't asked for, but perhaps needed. Later that day, he found her seated beside the corral fence, long after the light had faded into blue dusk. The air had sharpened, carrying the smell of a storm gathering far across the plains. She sat still, her posture disciplined yet weary, as if strength had been carved into her, but the weight of it dragged heavily at her shoulders. When he approached, his steps were slow, boots crunching softly against the dirt. He stopped a few paces behind her, careful not to invade the fragile space she kept around herself. "You should come inside before the storm breaks," he said, voice low, offering guidance rather than command. She didn't look at him. "Storms don't frighten me." "I know," he answered, "but you're hurting, whether you want to admit it or not." A small, nearly invisible stiffness tightened her spine, but he noticed it was hard not to, given how closely he observed her unspoken battles. She carried pride shaped from years of being forced to stand alone, yet even pride collapses under exhaustion. The wind shifted, raising dust spirals around them. Clouds thickened overhead, dark and restless. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate, as though motion itself required effort. "If you think taking me in gives you the right to measure my strength, you're mistaken." "I didn't save you," he replied. "I just happened to be the one who reached you first." She turned toward him at last, eyes sharp and assessing, honed by survival to seek hidden motives in every kindness. He met her gaze without flinching, his calm neither submissive nor challenging, simply steady. 30 years old, with a silence that made him appear carved from the same land he worked, he didn't try to tame her or shape her into something softer. He simply existed beside her without demanding anything. "You think too kindly," she muttered, though her voice lacked the force she intended. "Most men claim credit for things fate already decided." He gave a small shrug. "Then I won't claim any." Confusion flickered over her features for a heartbeat, as though she couldn't determine whether he mocked her or meant it sincerely. She studied him again, slower this time, and the edge in her breath softened. The wind grew colder, rattling the corral gate. The horses shifted nervously, hooves tapping the ground. A distant rumble rolled across the plains. He glanced toward the barn. "Storm's closer than it looks." "And you're still standing here," she said. "So are you." Their shared silence tightened like a thin line stretched between them, fragile, uncertain, yet unmistakably forming. She looked away first, not from dismissal, but from uncertainty, and he took a single step back as if offering her the space she hadn't asked for but needed. "I'll give you room," he said quietly, "but come inside before the lightning starts." He turned to leave, but her voice, rough, scraped by truths she rarely allowed to surface, stopped him. "Why don't you ask?" He faced her again, expression calm. "Ask what?" "Why I tried to take your horse that night." He didn't move closer, didn't let curiosity harden his tone. "If you wanted to tell me," he said gently, "you would." Her surprise was unguarded this time. "You aren't curious." "Of course I am. But what you're ready to share matters more than what I want to know." The answer struck deeper than pity ever could. Lightning streaked across the sky, veins of white fire illuminating the plains. She inhaled sharply, steadying herself against memories that cut like blades. "My tribe collapsed," she said, voice low. "Not from war, from hunger, from sickness. My sister, she ran before me, young, too young, and terrified. I thought if I had a horse I could reach her before the dark swallowed her, before she died alone." Her jaw tightened. She rarely spoke of loss, but the storm pried it open. He didn't speak immediately. The silence he offered wasn't avoidance. It was respect, patient and unhurried. "I'm sorry," he murmured at last. The simplicity of it made her chest ache. A deep crack of thunder split the sky, echoing across the plains like something ancient waking. A bright flash followed, tearing through the dark clouds. He glanced toward the barn. "We need to get inside." She nodded once, still reluctant, still guarded, but she followed him. The wind grew wild, sweeping across the open land as though trying to peel the world apart. They reached the barn just as the first sheets of rain crashed down, cold and punishing. Inside, the dimness smelled of hay, leather, and the metallic tang of an approaching storm. The whole structure trembled under the wind's fury. The horses snorted anxiously, hooves shifting against the ground. He checked the latches with deliberate hands. "This roof holds," he said, though the wind howled like something alive. "But stay near the center." She stood near the stalls, arms folded tightly across her chest. "You're not afraid," she observed. He shook his head. "Fear doesn't help here." She watched him, the storm's flashes illuminating his face in brief, fierce bursts. His calm wasn't bravado. It was survival, shaped by years of weathering storms alone. She understood that kind of strength, though hers had grown in different soil. Lightning cracked again, shaking the barn from the rafters down to the floor. A sudden blast of wind slammed against the barn doors, tearing one hinge partially loose. The door whipped inward violently. She lunged first, grabbing it with both hands, boots skidding across the slick floor. He was beside her instantly, bracing his weight against the wood. The storm roared around them, pulling with a force that threatened to wrench the door free. "Let go," he shouted over the wind. "It'll rip your arm off." "If it breaks open, the horses will run," she yelled back, refusing to release her grip. Their eyes locked, two stubborn souls refusing to yield. Together they shoved against the raging wind, muscles straining until he managed to slam the latch into place with a hard, decisive motion. They stumbled back, breath ragged, clothes soaked with rain blown in from the gaps. The barn shuddered but held. Outside, the storm eased from violent chaos into a steady, pulsing rhythm. She exhaled slowly. "You didn't have to hold it with me." He wiped rain from his brow. "And I wasn't going to let you take that risk alone." She studied him in the flickering lamplight, something shifting in her guarded stare. Not trust, not fully, but the unmistakable beginning of it. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the barn, something quieter and stronger rooted itself between them. Small, fragile, but undeniable.